Greetings everybody, welcome to Dark Souls 2. My name is Alarian, and this is the first video in the Safer Souls series. Now, what is the Safer Souls series? Well, as you may have heard me say in another video, the Safer Souls series really isn't about easy souls or casual souls or making the game easier to play. In fact, Dark Souls 2 is a difficult game. It is a challenging game, it is punishing, and no amount of information is going to make that not the case. However, Dark Souls 2 gets a reputation for being difficult, sometimes because some of the information that you need in order to be successful in this game is not well presented. Some of the game's concepts seem opaque, and I think that's fair. There are some very important concepts in this game, things related to your character's weight, stats like stability, weapon scaling, that are not well displayed, even though they have tooltips, and Dark Souls 2 has done a good job of improving over Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls in that respect. Some of that information is still just not apparent to new players, and that's really the purpose of these videos, to try and present some of that information in a way that is new player friendly, so that you can get past the first few hours of the game with less frustration and come to find whether you enjoy Dark Souls as a challenging experience without the frustration. Alright, so in this video what we're going to be talking about first is controls and controllers. The second thing we're going to talk about is the heads-up display. Then we're going to talk about equipment, equipping items and how to use them. And then finally in this video we're going to talk about weight and how that affects your character and your character's movement and rolling. In the next video we'll be talking about the player status screen, the attributes and how they affect the game and how they affect your player. And in that video we will also be talking about suggested builds for new players to follow in order to make the game a little bit easier, in my opinion. Now, if you're already comfortable with everything that I said was going to be in this video, I would recommend go ahead and skipping over the second one. But for everybody still here, let's talk about controls. Now, can you play Dark Souls 2 with a mouse and keyboard? The answer to that question is yes, you can. However, should you play Dark Souls 2 with a mouse and keyboard? I'm very comfortable saying that the answer to that question is absolutely not. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons for that, and the first reason you can see right here. This is analog movement. At this point I'm pushing my left control stick on my gamepad slightly forward, and over time I'm going to press it a little bit more, until finally I get to the end of its movement range. And as you can see, I went through about 3 or 4 different movement speeds in that time, and I had very specific control over how fast my character moved. And this is something you can't really replicate with the mouse and keyboard. While you can have something for slow movement and something for basic movement, and then finally sprint, you won't get this sort of level of fine control out of movements in the mouse and keyboard format. And that's a shame, but that's just kind of how it is. The other reason that I don't recommend using a mouse and keyboard has to do with attack delay or input delay. And in Dark Souls 1, when I'm using my gamepad and I want my character to attack, I hit my button and he immediately attacks. If I want to do a heavy attack, I hit that button and he again immediately attacks. However, the default setup for the keyboard requires a single click for a light attack versus a double click for a heavy attack. So when I input a single click for a light attack and then a double click for a heavy attack, there's a slight delay in which the computer is trying to determine whether I single clicked or if I'm going to double click. And in a game like Dark Souls, which is really about control and awareness, any sort of character delay or any sort of delay in action based on input is a very bad thing. We want the game to be responsive immediately, and because of that, I would say that the mouse and keyboard setup is really not very viable for getting through this game successfully without frustration. Now, what kind of gamepad should you use? Well, if you have either the 2 primary standards of gamepads, which right now are the Xbox 360 style or the PlayStation 3 style, and you're comfortable with either of those, then go with whatever works for you. I will say that in Dark Souls or in Demon Souls, when I started the game like many others, which was a PS3 exclusive, I used the PS3 pad there and it was okay. However, when Dark Souls 1 was released, I immediately switched to the Xbox 360, and that has nothing to do with console wars or console superiority or console choice. It was purely because of controllers. So my preference is definitely the Xbox 360 controller. So if you do not have a gamepad, or you have both of them, you're trying to decide which one is going to be better, I would definitely recommend the Xbox 360 gamepad rather than the PS3 gamepad. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And the first, again, has to do with the analog stick. And it's the shape of the analog stick that has the most effect for me. First of all, there's a depression on the top of the analog stick on the Xbox 360, one that you can rest comfortably your thumb down into, as opposed to the PS3 stick, which bubbles out into the thumb and actually causes the thumb to want to slide away from it. And that's really important when it comes to targeting, because in Dark Souls 1, when I want, or rather in Dark Souls 2, when I want to target something, I have to press the right stick, the camera control stick, down as if it were a button, and that's a little awkward, especially if you're not used to already doing it. And on the Xbox 360 controller, because my finger is already depressed down, or my finger's already down in a depression, it becomes much easier for me to make that target and without actually deflecting the stick in the wrong direction. So from a targeting perspective, I find that it's much easier to control the camera and to select targets with a depressed top of the analog stick. The other thing about it is also that the Xbox 360's analog sticks are slightly shorter than the PS3's, and they have more resistance. So when I'm going to depress the right stick as a button, I'm much less likely to actually press it off in some random direction, just because of that extra resistance and the fact that the top of the control stick has already accepted my thumb to some extent. I just like it better for that. Also, I prefer the triggers on the Xbox 360 style rather than the triggers the way they are on the PS3 style, because on the PS3 style they're sort of depressed in, they curve backwards towards the back of the gamepad, and that actually makes it a little bit harder to get to them rather than the triggers on the Xbox style. Alright, so having talked about gamepads and controllers, let's take a look at the HUD. And up at the top left of the screen you can see obviously the very bright red long health bar, and as in any game, that as you take damage that'll deplete, and when it gets to 0 then your character dies. Below that though is the stamina bar. That's the thin green bar, and that's actually to a large extent the more important of the two. Now, new players will tend to focus on their health bar because obviously when you run out of health your character keels over dead. Experienced players, though, will tend to focus more on their stamina bar, and the reason for that is every action that you perform in Dark Souls, short of walking, will generally use some amount of stamina. Now, whether I'm swinging my sword or if I'm taking hits on my shield, all of these things cost stamina. So the issue becomes that there's very little difference between 100 hit points and 1 hit point, because in those cases your character's actually still alive. However, the difference between 100 stamina and 0 stamina may be the difference in the ability for you to block or dodge or roll away, get out of harm's way long enough for you to stop and heal. So stamina becomes really the management of choice for Dark Souls players. You watch stamina more than you watch health, because it's the thing that tells you, can I attack? Can I block? Can I roll away? Do I have to get out to heal? Stamina really kind of determines whether your character is going to be successful or not, or rather stamina control does. Now to the left of that you'll see your covenant information, and it's an icon. In this case you see it's a golden sun, which indicates that I'm a member of the Heirs to the Sun covenant on this character. Now when you start out that will be blank, and as you proceed throughout the game you'll be able to join and try out different covenants. We'll cover those more in a different video. Below the stamina bar you can also see the active effects, and these are the things that are currently affecting your character based on what you have equipped. So for example, one of the items I have equipped is the Chloranthy Ring, which at the bottom you can see raises your stamina recovery speed. That is represented under the stamina bar. Right in the middle you can see 3 green arrows pointing up. That tells me that I am regenerating stamina at a higher rate than I would if I was not wearing that ring. Okay, and there are other effects that will show up there. In the bottom left will be your active abilities tabs. There are 4 of them. You can see them here, right where it says Great Lightning Spear. And the top one is your spells. Okay, and on either side of that are your weapons. In this case, you can see in the right hand I have a claymore, and on the left side I have a shield. And important to watch, right below those now is a red bar, and this is something that's new to Dark Souls 2, but it shows you your active items durability. And over time, as you fight enemies, that red bar will go down. So all items in Dark Souls 2 that you can wear can degrade over time, and you can repair those by various methods, but it's important to keep an eye on that little red bar because it tells you how far your equipment is degraded and whether it's close to breaking. And when something is broken, it can't be used effectively until it's actively repaired by a blacksmith. All right. And then finally is my active items tab. And this comes from my currently active items in my item belt, which leads us to talk about the equipment screen. Right, so up here, this is the equipment screen, and you can see that in Dark Souls 2, you can equip up to 3 items in either hand, with the right hand up here depicted by the axe and sword, and down here the left hand by the shield and I guess that's a sai or parrying dagger. And you can have 3 here at any given time, and you can click on one of these using the A button or the X button if you're a PS3 user to go ahead and select weapons and equip them there. If you want to remove something, you can simply hit X or the square button on the PS3 pad to remove it. Now, you can in Dark Souls 2 equip weapons in your left hand, something you couldn't effectively do and dual wield in Dark Souls 1 or in Demon Souls. That is possible now, and we're going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about movesets. But 3 weapons right hand, 3 weapons left hand. And then in Dark Souls 2, you can equip up to 4 rings. And these are the rings that I've equipped here. And you do that again just by clicking on them and selecting the ring that you want. There are 4 pieces of armor that you can wear at any given time. Those are head, chest, hands, and legs. And then down here is your tool belt. And you can equip up to 10 items in your tool belt. And these are the items that show up down here at the bottom left. And you can scroll through those. Now, how do you do this? You use the D-pad to actively control what is going on, or what your active abilities are. So if I wanted to change my right-hand weapon from my claymore to my bow, I would tap right on the D-pad and he would change it. If I wanted to change my shield or make it go away, I would tap left on the D-pad. Spells, if I wanted to change my current active spell, I would tap up. As you can see here, I only have 1 spell equipped. And then at the bottom I can scroll through my active items using the down on the D-pad. Unfortunately, in Dark Souls 2, there's still no way to assign these to quick hotkeys if you wanted to use these on the keyboard. Unfortunately, you do have to scroll all the way through them, which is one of the reasons that really you want to keep in mind what you actually need equipped here as opposed to just putting something in every slot. Because if I'm in a situation where I want to use my Estus flask to heal, and then I want to use say a poison moss to stop my poison buildup, I have to scroll between those two, and it can be a long way. So if I use my poison moss to stop poison, then I want to heal, I have to scroll through various items to get there, and that's not necessarily the best way to do things, but that is how it is. This leads me to talk a little bit about movesets. What are movesets? Movesets are central to the Dark Souls series. They're something you really need to understand. And when we're talking about movesets, we're talking about what actions your character will perform at a given time depending on what items or weapons they have equipped. All right, your character has movesets. Enemies have movesets. Movesets are basically central to the game. Understanding your ability to attack at a timing that is an opportune moment given any enemy's moves is really one of the primary things you'll learn as you play through Dark Souls. So when we're talking about movesets, we're basically talking about what actions your character can perform. Now again, I'm going to be using the terminology for the Xbox controller, which is the A button is the interact button. That's the X button on the PS3. The X button on the Xbox 360 controller is the use items button, which would be the square button on the PS3. The Y button in Dark Souls, or on the Xbox 360 controller, is the triangle button and is used for two-handing a weapon, as you can see here. And then finally, the B button on the Xbox controller is the dodge or roll button, and that equates to the O button on the PS3. So those are what I'm going to be using. Again, I'm going to be using the Xbox terminology. Alright, so how do you work your character? Well, obviously you move your character around using the left stick. That should be pretty intuitive. Also, you control the camera with the right stick, so you can walk around and control your camera to help move your character in the direction you want. And you should definitely spend some time, if you're not comfortable with gamepads, just getting used to moving your character around and moving the camera around. As I said and you saw earlier, the other important point to note is that in order to target enemies, you have to press the camera stick, the right control stick, down like a button to engage your target lock. And from there, your character will move relative to that target lock. They will always keep the target in the center and attempt to move. They'll slide to the side, back and forth based on your left stick input. Now, for weapons, the way to attack is you actually use the R keys, the bumper buttons. So the R and L keys, that would be right 1 for light attack, right 2 for heavy attack. And then for the left bumper keys, the initial one will be L1, and that's block if you have a shield equipped, or if you have a weapon equipped, which I will do now. That would be perform again a light attack, and then with L2 a heavy attack. With shields it's a little bit different. I do want to show the two different shield styles. Now there are 3 different types of shields in Dark Souls, and they are bucklers like the one you see here, which are small light shields, and they don't have a lot of physical protection. The second type is kite shields, which are a little bit more defensive and a little bit tougher, but a little bit heavier. Now bucklers and kite shields have 2 separate attacks, or 2 separate moves. First again the L1, which is block, and then the L2, which is a parry animation. And this is a fairly advanced technique that we're not going to be focusing a lot on in the Safer Souls series because, again, as new players, you want to focus on things that are going to be helpful to you immediately, and you can learn things like parrying a little more organically over time. So L1 to block is really what we want to focus on. The other type of shield that I didn't talk about yet is the Great Shield, and this is a much larger, much more defensive shield, and it has the same L1 block, but it also has a heavy L2 attack. Now, again, not something you're probably going to focus on a whole lot in this series because, again, it's one of those sort of advanced or situational things, and I'll tell you frankly, having played through the game several times now, I've never actually used this for any specific reason. So, just good to know that with the Great Shield you can block, you can attack, but you can't parry. You don't have that ability to parry like you would with the Buckler or the Kite Shield. Alright. Couple other things. We want to talk about some of the more hidden actions that you can perform with your weapon keys, and to do that I'm going to switch over to two-handing. Now we're not going to talk about two-handing much in the Safer Souls series because, again, I think it's important for players to focus on things that are useful to them early, like blocking and rolling, rather than trying to two-hand weapons at this point. That's something you're going to learn over time. But with two-hand, if you're dual-wielding weapons, you can R1 and L1 back and forth to create your own sort of combos with that. However, there's a button at the top of your gamepad, the Y button or triangle button, that will allow you to normally two-hand weapons, as you can see here. So hit Y, two-hand, back to dual wield, or single sword and board, and then back to two-hand. And again, you have a different move set just for two-handing, and you should definitely get familiar with your different two-hand abilities, R1 and R2. One of the more hidden abilities in Dark Souls 2 that's new is the ability to power stance. And power stancing is something that you can only do with two weapons of the same type. So here the Claymore is a slashing weapon, and the Black Dragon Sword is again a slashing weapon. So they have the same type, and if you have at least double the stats that you need in order to use these weapons. You see at the bottom there's a 20 and a 13. That means I need 20 strength and 13 dex in order to equip this weapon effectively. I can go into what's called a power stance. Now I do have more than that, so if I hit Y and hold it rather than releasing it, I'll go into power stance. And from power stance we can still perform our normal R1 and R2 with the right hand. However, if I use the L1 or the L2, I can actually swing both weapons at the same time. And this obviously does a little bit more damage, but it also takes a lot more stamina to do. Again, this is a pretty advanced ability, so we're not going to be using it much in the Safer Souls series, but suffice it to say that it is a skill that you should be aware of. Finally, a couple of the buttons that we haven't talked about, a couple of the moves. Again, I mentioned it earlier, the square button or the X button is the default use item. So if I wanted to use one of these items like a throwing dagger, I would scroll down to the throwing daggers using the down D-pad, and then I could use the X button to throw it. And finally, that brings us to dodge. And this is the right side button, the B button or the O button on the PS3. And from a default state, what dodge does, if you're not touching anything else, is it causes your character to sort of hop back. If you're pressing in a direction, it'll cause your character to roll in that direction. So you can see here my character is now rolling. And you can also see here, and this is an important point to bring up, and this is where we're going to talk about weight. My character is rolling quite slowly. In fact, he's rolling very badly. It's taking him a long time to go down, and if you're playing the game, you'll actually get a little bit of feedback on your gamepad to tell your character, or tell you that your character is landing very heavily. This is what we call a fat roll. And fat rolls are very, very poor at helping your character escape from bad situations. They're not good at dodging out of the way of enemy attacks. And this is where we need to talk about weight. Now if you come here, you can see all the items I have equipped, and then on the bottom right side of the screen you'll be able to see my weight information. That's above the souls where it says 36,140. Above that you'll see 53.3 over 76. 76 is my character's current weight maximum. 53.3 is the current weight of all the items I have currently equipped, and that includes the weapons and shields that you may have equipped but aren't currently active. So right now you can see I've got my Claymore out and I've got my Dragon Rider Great Shield out, but here the Black Dragon Sword and the Benhart's Parma as well as the Longbow are added into my weight, and if I remove them, my weight down on the other side, on the right side, will drop. And you saw that dropped, put this up again, below 70 as soon as I removed the Benhart's Parma, and that is the point that you need to be aware of. 70%, that's the percentage of your equipped items versus your total encumbrance, is the marker that as new players you want to be 100% aware of. You never want to equip items that take you over 70%. And the reason for that is 70% is the borderline between fat rolling, as you saw earlier, and what we call mid-rolling. And as you can see here, by pressing forward and hitting the B key, I roll much quicker, I recover much quicker, I use a little bit less stamina. Now, there is another threshold to roll even faster. I'm not sure what it is. In Dark Souls, or in Demon Souls, I believe it was 20 or 25%. In Dark Souls, I never used it, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. And likewise, in Dark Souls 2, I don't use fast roll. But if you get your equipment down to a certain point, your weight, then you can roll even quicker. But for the purposes of playing through the first time, being able to mid-roll is a really good guideline for where you want your weight. So you want your weight down to constantly stay below 70%. And that'll be something that you'll be balancing with your equipment over time. Alright, so in this video we talked about controls, we talked about the basic heads-up display, we talked about equipment and how to access it, and some basic move sets. I hope that helps you out. In the next video, again, we'll be talking about attributes and we'll be suggesting character builds. All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope to see you in the next video.